Okay, so moving on to the second part of the review, aggregate demand and supply model, or what they call ADAS. So if you want to go ahead, move on to that section in your review packet and draw this model. So you may want to hit pause, but make sure you get all parts to this. And then when you're finished, go ahead and start filling in. It says number one, price level is, and you should know that that is synonymous with interest rates. When we talk about reading the graph and seeing price level changes, we're seeing changes in the interest rates as well. Notice that aggregate demand is made up of the spending on the same things as aggregate expenditures, C plus IG plus G plus XN. Hopefully on your graph you also marked the equilibrium price level and quantity as shown there. We have here the three reasons for the downward slope. You don't have to get the definition down of aggregate demand. I think that you're pretty familiar with it, but you're basically, you have the curve is showing the amounts of real output that buyers collectively want to purchase at price level. So instead of one buyer of one type of good, it's all buyers of all types of goods. What you do want to write down are the three reasons for them, the downward slope. In micro, if you remember, there are reasons like substitution effect and income effect for demand for it to be downward, for the law to be in effect that as price levels drop, that quantity demanded or real GDP will increase. They're very similar in macro. So the real balances effect, that's that idea that at higher price level, your money has less purchasing power. So you're going to buy less at higher price levels. Interest rate effect. So as interest rates go down, you are going to increase your consumption. And foreign purchases effect, that's like the substitution effect. In micro, if there are other options, there are foreign objects or imports that you could buy. So those are the three reasons why demand is downward sloping. I don't know why I give you so much space to write determinants of aggregate demand, but they are essentially the four components, C plus IG plus G plus XN. So we could give lots of examples of those four elements changing, but a change in consumption or investment, private investment, or government or net exports would cause AD to shift. What shifts supply? Number four, the three biggies, cost of inputs or resource prices. That would include wages, natural resources, productivity, and then excise taxes and subsidies. Hopefully you know with productivity, the more productive resources are, the more there is going to be supplied. Demand pull inflation is pretty easy. You can just write down the definition. Well, inflation means increased price level. You should just know that, increased price level. So demand pull inflation is an increase in price levels because demand has increased or shifted up. So you just see the right word, shift equals a higher price level, thus inflation. Cost push inflation is the same phenomenon that you have increased price level. So you write increased price level. The difference is that it's caused by a decrease in supply or a shifting left in supply. So there's your definition. Increased price levels due to a decrease in supply. So just look at the graph. In order for a supply curve change to make price level go up, has to be that supply decreased. Sticky prices, I wouldn't worry a whole lot about in this unit. We'll refer back to them a little later. The basic concept is, yes, here AD shifted to the left. So you have a decrease in price level and output. The concept of sticky price means that even though AD shifted to the left and real output has gone down, the price level really remains at the same level as it had before. Again, you don't really need to write anything down for that because we'll talk more about that in a later unit. I would like you to be able to fill out number 8. How can you have economic growth without inflation? Well, we know economic growth means there's an increase in real GDP. So if you look at this situation here, if AD goes up, great, we have more GDP being produced. So that means more people are at work. Our problem is inflation. How could you possibly fix that scenario where you have the economic growth, but you keep the price level down? Hopefully you saw that AS, supply, could also increase. So as AD shifts up, in the first case, go ahead and point to the new equilibrium, price level increase. But if you then go to the second AS curve, if your supply increased at the same time, your price level did go up from the original, but not quite as high as it would have had supply not moved as well. So if you increase supply even more, you may get down to that original price level. So if supply can continue to keep up with demand, you may prevent some terrible inflation. Now we're drawing the long run aggregate supply curve. I know here it says ASLR, aggregate supply sub long run. A lot of times the AP test will call it LRAS, long run aggregate supply. What you want to pause it here and you want to label it. What you want to note is that it's perfectly inelastic. You should write that perfectly inelastic, right? It's a vertical line. Here's the definition. You need to get this down. The long run means that real output does not change based on price level. Say that again. Real output does not change based on price level. And the graph visualizes that. Output, GDP, is the same quantity no matter where you are on the y-axis. So what this means is the long run is not a specific time frame. It is by definition, get this down, when nominal wages have caught up with price level changes. Nominal wages have caught up with price level changes. So as price levels go up, we would think that it would decrease the amount of GDP created. However, if people's nominal wages increased at the same rate, or their money was buying the same amount of goods, then there is no change in GDP. So that's important. For number 9, short run aggregate supply curve, just draw an upsloping line. And you want to write down, so that's when it's upsloping, not a straight line, but an upsloping line. And you just want to write nominal wages have not caught up with price level changes yet. Nominal wages have not caught up with price level changes. You will normally deal with the short run on the AP test unless they specifically specify that you're dealing with the long run. Let's move on to fiscal policy. We know that the government feels compelled or sometimes wants to get involved to try to help the economy of a nation. They feel responsible. They're held accountable. One way that a government can respond is by fiscal policy. You have on your guide, Council of Economic Advisors. Those are the people that make decisions or give advice on economic policy. I don't care if you don't fill that out. Definition of fiscal policies, then. There are 2 things that the government can do. Here we go. Definition 1, change in government spending. So the government can change the amount that it spends, goods or services. Or second part of the definition, changes in taxes for consumers, basically, or businesses. So the government can't affect taxes that people or businesses have to pay, or they can change their own spending. That's the definition of fiscal policy. And there are 2 types, expansionary and contractionary. So I would add that in the definition as well. The 2 types are contractionary and expansionary, depending on what the economic situation is at the time. Okay. Number 3, expansionary fiscal policy. I want you to write this down. It's a reaction to a recession. So look at the graph here. Aggregate demand 1 would be like the original AD curve. Aggregate demand curve 2, AD2, is the recession. It's a decrease in aggregate demand, so you have lower output, you have more unemployment because there aren't as many people working because you don't need to produce as much, etc. So the government would institute what we call an expansionary fiscal policy. So you have, under the definition, reaction to a recession, and add the 2 fiscal policies that are expansionary. Increase government spending. That would shift AD2 to AD1. Or cut taxes for people. So those are the 2 expansionary fiscal policies. Increase government spending or cutting taxes. If the government has an expansionary policy, they are what's called budget deficit. And that should say expansionary fiscal policy. Budget deficit, expansionary fiscal policy. This means, write this down, government spends more money than it brings in tax revenue. I'll say that again. Government spends more money than it brings in tax revenue. I would like you then to record the graph that we saw just before. Okay, so I want you to sketch the graph. I don't want you to sketch the numbers because the numbers that they're using here deal with the sticky prices. I just want you to look at the graph. You do not need to mark the intersections. All I want you to mark are the axes, the aggregate supply, the 2 aggregate demand curves, and the little dotted line. The little dotted line, the distance between the AD2 and the little dotted line, is the change in the initial spending. It's the little spark that the government needs to put into the economy that will then cause this huge increase in GDP because now more people have government jobs, so they're buying jeans. So then Gap hires more people who buy groceries, and then Kroger hires more people. So I would just want you to see that visually on the map, the multiplier effect on the graph. I would like you to see that there's a little bit of spending that is increased by government spending, and it amplifies, it multiplies into the real GDP gap. So the equations for government spending, you want to write down change. So this is part C equation. Change in real GDP, what the gap is in the economy, equals whatever the initial spending is times the multiplier. Taxes are tricky. So you want to write for taxes. So the second equation under part C, it's the exact same as government spending, except you got to throw in the MPC because you have to figure out how much the government is putting in consumers' pockets are actually going to go into the economy as the jump start. So you need to find out how much, what the MPC is, how much people are actually going to spend. It would be like the government spending being gasoline put into a car, an economy. If I know I need 5 gallons of gas to get my car, my economy going, and I give that 5 gallons of gas to my friend to fill up, well, I know my friend's going to pocket some of that and save some of the gas for himself. So only 4 gallons of gas is going to be put in the car or the economy. So I need to give my friend 6 or 7 gallons of gas so that he'll save some, but the 5 gallons I want in my tank are still going to get there. And before we move on to contractionary, just note the problems with expansionary government spending is that, and write this down, the economy grows, real GDP goes up, and unemployment goes down. That's the good part, but you want to write that down. Economy grows, real GDP goes up, unemployment goes down. However, there's inflation. When the government increases AD, there is inflation, and there's what's called crowding out, which we'll discuss here in a bit. Little part E, taxes. You can rewrite the tax equation there, or if you wrote it under part C, you can just skip that. Let's move on to contractionary fiscal policy. What you want to write down, it's a reaction to rapid inflation, where you are reining in an economy spending. It's a reaction to inflation, rapid inflation, and you're reining in an economy spending. So it's sort of the opposite of expansionary. This is when the government wants to pull back in the economy, contract it. Part A, a budget surplus. This is when the government then is bringing more in tax revenue than it is spending. So that's important. More in tax revenue than it is spending out. Don't worry about the graph. It's basically the opposite of the expansionary policy. For the equations then, you want to put the same equations that we had before. But instead of for expanding the economies, they're the equations that we use for contracting it. So instead of in spending tax cuts, people will spend some of the money in a tax break, and they'll also save some of the money in expansionary policy. Well, in contractionary, if you raise people's taxes, some are going to pay from their consumption, and some are going to pay from their savings. So there's nothing really new to write there at all. You're just repeating what you had for expansionary policy. Let's talk about stabilizers, built-in stability. I want you to write this down. Automatic stabilizer equals automatically expand or contract the economy as GDP changes. Say that again. Automatic stabilizers automatically expand or contract the economy as GDP changes. Also write this down. The benefit is that there is no new legislation that's required. So an example here would be the progressive tax system. Please copy this graph down, hit pause, copy it down. Basically what you see here is the government spending and the tax revenue. Obviously, as real GDP goes up, taxes go up accordingly. So as people make more money, they move into a higher percentage tax bracket. Where the government spending to the left of the intersection is greater than what they're bringing in taxes, that would be deficit spending. That's our expansionary policy side. I would label that. to the right of the intersection point where tax revenue is greater than government spending, that's surplus, when the government is taking more money in taxes than it is spending. Last but not least, we have crowding out. Probably would have been more appropriate for me to talk about crowding out right after we did expansionary policy. We see here that AD is increasing, perhaps by increased government spending. Great, we said GDP has gone up, unemployment thus has gone down, but price levels have gone up, inflation has occurred. Here's what you want to write down. You want to draw the graph, and I want you to write next to the side, interest rates rose, right? Price levels went up, so interest rates rose. And write this down. Crowding out was the effect of this change in government spending. So the change in government spending that caused AD to increase, crowding out is the effect of it. I want you to write down the word definition. You're going to write out the definition. Here we go. An increase in public spending, in parentheses, government spending. When I say public spending, I mean government spending. An increase in public or government spending can cause a decrease in private spending and investment. An increase in public or government spending can cause a decrease in private spending, investment, consumption, etc. So IG would go down especially. So this could affect IG or C, consumption, like if you're buying on credit card. And this is what goes along with expansionary fiscal policy. Basically, and I would write this down, interest rate sensitive people or groups or investors. Interest rate sensitive groups or people or investors. Interest rate sensitive groups or people or investors are left out of the benefits of increased government spending. I do want to make a note, and you might want to jot this down. The AP test might say that crowding out offsets government spending completely. That means it cancels it out. Whatever the G component of GDP increase did to AD, the decrease in IG or C made it go down in equal amounts, so there's no change. Oftentimes, though, the AP test won't mention crowding out, so ignore it. Or if they say crowding out only partially offsets government spending, then you know the government did shift AD to the right. Maybe not as much as it planned on, but it still increased it. That should do it for this review session. Happy studying.